So we'll give folks another minute or so, and then I will go ahead and do our welcome. Okay, so I will welcome folks to continue to trickle in. I will kick things off here by thanking you all for joining. I'm going to be introducing our speaker in just a moment here. We also have a couple of students who are going to be helping us with our Q&A sessions at the end. We've got Max and we've got Naja here. Glad to have all of you joining us. So welcome to tonight's Green Living Seminar virtual presentation. I am Elena Traister. I'm a professor in the Environmental Studies Department here at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. This semester's Green Living Seminar is organized around the theme Individual Actions and Environmental Sustainability. All webinars are free and open to the public. They take place on Wednesdays at 5:30. You can register online for any of our upcoming webinars at www.mcla.edu/greenliving, all one word. And there you can also find a link to videos of this semester's previous presentations on our YouTube channel. Today's presentation will last for about 40 minutes and then will be followed by a question and answer session. You'll see that there's a Q&A box that's going to be remaining open throughout the presentation, so you can actually submit your questions anytime, and we'll get to those at our Q&A session at the end. And a quick announcement for next week's presentation. We hope you'll also come back and join us next week on Wednesday, February 17th. We'll hear from Dr. Elisa Watson, Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Programs and Associate Professor of Marketing at University of Virginia. She's going to be presenting a lecture titled Consumer Demand for Fuel Efficient Vehicles and the Role of Social Marketing. Today's presentation on cycling for sustainable cities will be given by Dr. Ralph Buehler, Professor and Chair of Urban Affairs and Planning at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Ralph's research, outreach, and teaching seek to advance the understanding of determinants of individual travel behavior and the sustainability of transport systems. The goal is to identify and share policy lessons on how to achieve a more environmentally sound, economically efficient, and socially equitable urban transport system. So since in this seminar, we have recently heard that going car-free is one of the top 4 decisions individuals can make to reduce their personal contribution to climate change, I hope you will enjoy learning from Dr. Buehler how cycling can be made feasible for everyone and not limited to especially fit, daring, well-trained cyclists riding expensive bicycles, how to make city cycling safe, practical, and convenient for all ages and abilities. We are so happy to have you with us virtually, so thanks so much for doing this. I will turn it over to you, Ralph.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. Let me share my screen before I can get started. This is the right screen here. And then let's put it in the presentation mode. So my presentation tonight is titled Cycling for Sustainable Cities. And in a nutshell, as was just announced, the goal of the presentation is to explore how bicycling can be made safe, practical, and convenient for all cyclists. And on that title slide, you can already see several of these measures, and we'll look at them in more detail during the presentation, that help promote bicycling, including bicycling infrastructure, but also events to promote cycling, bike sharing, etc. So bicycling has been promoted by governments of all levels during the last 20, 30 years. And the main reasons are, and some of them were mentioned in the introduction already, bicycling is environmentally friendly. There's virtually no pollution at all while riding or while using a bicycle. There are almost no non-renewable resources used. It's also quite equitable. It's financially affordable. It's physically possible for most, and it's economical. It has minimal private and public costs, in particular compared to building public transport systems or building roadways. It may take a little longer, but the very exercise it provides reduces medical costs and has been shown to extend our healthy life expectancy. So cycling is healthy. It's a great source of physical activity for daily travel and also for recreation. It's cheaper and easier and more dependable than formal exercise routines. And it can be integrated into daily lifestyles to achieve practical travel needs. If you ride your bike to work every day, while going to work, you get physical activity because you have integrated it into your daily life. Bicycling varies by cities and by countries. This shows you the percentage of trips, typical daily trips made in Europe, North America, Australia, and Japan. You see all the way to your left, it's the United States with around 1% of all trips made by bicycle, followed by Australia, Canada, the UK, and France, all below 3% of trips by bike. And you go all the way to the right, you get to the Netherlands, where about 28% of all daily trips are made by bicycle, followed by Denmark, 14%, Japan, Germany, and Sweden. So quite a big variability. If we look at cities, we also see that variability across cities, but this graph also shows you the trend in increasing share of trips in large cities in Europe and the Americas, and there I think one Australian city also snuck in there, and some Latin American cities that have increased their bicycling. There's a notable number of cities here that have increased their bicycling over the last 20, 30 years from very low levels. They have had big increases, but from very low levels. These include Chicago in the US, Melbourne in Australia, Seattle, San Francisco, Buenos Aires, Montreal, Paris, Santiago de Chile, Minneapolis, Washington, DC, Portland, Oregon, Vienna, Sevilla, Spain. And I wanted to notice here, Portland, Oregon going from about 1% to about 7%, and then Sevilla, Spain also going from almost less than 1% to 7 or 8%. And we'll see these cities later again in a couple of graphs. And then of course we have cities that have had higher cycling levels and have increased these cycling levels even more from these high levels. And they are Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Munich, or Berlin. There's a great potential to increase cycling even in countries that are fairly car-oriented like the United States. For example, in the US, in 2017, about 1/4 of all trips we take daily are shorter than a mile. And about 40% of all of our trips are shorter than 2 miles. And these are trips that can be very easily made by bicycle. We've gotten a little bit of that taste of how much the bike can do now during the COVID pandemic and the COVID crisis. This shows you bicycling levels in various countries comparing 2020 to 2019. And whenever the colorful lines here are above the zero, we have more cycling in 2020 compared to 2019. You see there's variability. You also see these big dips here for the European countries. That's when they had lockdowns and people couldn't leave their home or could only be 1 kilometer within their home, and cycling decreased then. But cycling is up across the board in many places. So what about trip distances and bicycling? This shows you the percentage of trips made by bicycle by different trip distance categories in miles for the US and the UK, and then in kilometers for Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And for all countries, we sort of see that the shorter trips have a higher percentage of them made by bicycle, and as trip distance gets longer, there's a lower share of trips made by bicycle. But we also notice that in the United States, of the trips shorter than a mile or shorter than 2 miles, only about 2% are made by bicycle. And then when you compare that with Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, of these short trips, they're between 25 and 75% of these short trips are made by bicycle. You also note that in, for example, a country like Denmark, trips longer than 10 kilometers, that's about 6 to 7 miles, 11% of those are still made by bicycle. So we can really cycle more for the short trips, but we can also cycle for longer trip distances. We can also increase cycling by getting all age groups to cycle. Here you see the percentage of trips made by bike for different age groups in the US, the UK, Japan, Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And again, we noticed that those in the youngest age group, typically those that don't have a driver's license or are not allowed legally to drive, have the highest share of their trips they make by bike. In the Netherlands, it's 40% of trips by those younger than 18 are made by bike. In the US, then, over here, we see how this drops to about 0.4% of trips by those 70 and older. There's similar pattern in the United Kingdom. But if you look at the other countries, you see that cycling drops a little bit or drops after people reach driving age, but it stays at a fairly high level, 10 to 12% in Japan, Germany, and Denmark. And in the Netherlands, it stays around 25%. And even those 70 and older make about a quarter of their trips by bicycle. So here we have the animation. We can, of course, cycle at all ages. We can cycle very young, and we can cycle well into old age, and we can even cycle with specially made bicycles. Another big difference between places with a lot of cycling and little cycling is the share of bike trips that's made by women. In Australia, the UK, the US, and Canada, only a quarter to a third of all bike trips are made by women. While in the other European countries and Japan, you see here about half or even more than half of bike trips are made by women. So there's truly a great potential to increase bicycling among women in the countries on the left of this graph here. In Denmark, for example, over 50% of all bike trips are made by women. So why do we see these differences, and what do we know about people who ride a bike and people who do not ride a bike? And Roger Geller, who is the bike planner of Portland, Oregon, that's one of the premier cycling cities in the United States, and Jennifer Dill, who works at Portland State, they investigated types of people in the population as they relate to bicycling. And they came up with something very interesting. They came up with 4 groups of individuals. They said there is one share of the group that's called the strong and fearless. These are people who ride anywhere. The percentages here are different because Roger Geller, the bike planner, just came up based on his practical experience with some numbers, and then Jennifer Dill actually did a survey, and based on her survey, categorized individuals. So they're strong and fearless that are riding anywhere. They're enthused and confident. They're riding. They're not quite as fearless as the first group, but they are pretty much into bike riding. But then there's a big group of people, around 60%, 50 to 60%, that's interested in bicycling, but has concerns about cycling, mainly safety concerns. And then there's a group, about 1/3 to 40% of the population, that will never ride a bike. That's no way, no how. But if we take this typology, we can find very interesting differences. For example, in her survey, Jennifer Dill asked, when I ride a bicycle, I'm afraid of being hit by a car. And then she looked at the share of people in these groups that strongly agreed or somewhat agreed. And what we see is that the strong and fearless, still about 40% of them are afraid to be hit by a car. The enthused and confident, we had 50%. But then for the interested but concerned, we are over 80% of those agree with this statement or strongly agree that they are afraid of being hit by a car. And so if we want to increase bicycling in a meaningful way, we have to get those who are interested in cycling but concerned about its safety to ride bicycles. And one way to do that is to make cycling safe and make it safe for everyone. It's especially important, research shows, for the young, the old, anyone with disabilities, for the timid or the risk averse. Research also shows that women tend to be more sensitive to safety concerns than men. And maybe the greater safety of cycling in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany helps explain the much higher levels of cycling there that we saw before. When we look at safety, there is a phenomenon that is found again and again that's called safety in numbers. As cycling levels increase in a place, the injury and fatality rates per trip or per kilometer cycled are falling. That's not a causal relationship, but it's a correlation. They vary together. And it's likely a correlation that's a little bit spurious, as we say in research talk, which means that cycling levels, as they increase, they typically increase because we have more bikeway infrastructure, we have more enforcement, we have people getting more aware of cyclists and starting to look out when they make a right-hand turn. If bikes are coming by, they look out over their shoulder before they open a car door into a bike lane, etc. So there are many things going on that help explain safety in numbers, but it's a correlation that we find a lot. This is an example of safety in numbers using the city of Portland. In gray, you see the bike traffic in the city and the bars here as it increased between 1991 and 2012. In red, you see the crashes reported by bike. And in the gray line and in the orange line, you see the crash index, which is the number of crashes divided by the number of cyclists in the city. And it is declining. I talked before about safer cycling in the European countries. This is a study we did recently where we looked at the cyclist fatality rates, so the number of cyclists killed while cycling per year per 100 million kilometers cycled. And we see that the United States is unfortunately quite an outlier from the other countries with a fatality rate that's much, much higher than in the other countries. Public policies are very important for bicycling. And many of these European countries have seen deteriorating bicycling safety in the 1950s and 1960s before they turned around their policies to accommodate bicycling, walking, public transport, and restrict car use. We look at a couple of these examples from the bicycling lens. So how can we encourage more cycling while making it safer? One key are better bicycling facilities, building bikeways that connect people from the origin of their trip, where they start, to the destination where they have to go. The other one is integrating bicycles with public transport. This allows for longer trips to be taken without a car, and the bike can often serve as the first mile, last mile connector mode. Traffic calming of residential neighborhoods. This means reducing car travel speeds and volumes in neighborhoods, and there bicyclists can share the road with cars. Mixed-use zoning and improved urban design. This is mainly to keep trip distances short enough to be easily made by bicycle. Restricting motor vehicle use, that's sort of pushing people out of cars while making bicycling more attractive. Traffic education and safe routes to school programs, as well as traffic regulations that protect cyclists and enforcement of those. When we looked at who implements these policies, we found that national level governments, in the US that would be the federal government, play some role. The national level may have goals to increase cycling or make it safer. They may help collecting data and benchmarking, sort of comparing different cities, different states with each other. They may provide money and build in bikeway infrastructure along federal and national roadways, so federal highways, for example. They may have guidelines for motorist training. They may have guidelines for traffic laws, signage that's consistent across the country, roadway and bikeway design guidelines, how these things are built. National governments also provide matching funds for local and state projects. So the state and local level may pay 50%, the federal government gives another 50% to that. And sometimes, for example, in Denmark, we saw that and in the US, we also had a program in 4 cities where the federal government gives money for showcase projects for local level of government to sort of experiment with things. But ultimately, we found that's the state and the local governments that are responsible for implementing bike infrastructure and biking programs. This is a graphic that we created looking at cities in Europe and in the United States, tracking their growth in bikeway infrastructure, so in cycling facilities, over the timeframes that are shown in parentheses there. Also looking at the growth in cycling. And so in all of these cities that expanded the bikeway facilities, the percentage of bicycling also increased. And then we looked at a trend in the fatalities and the severe injuries relative to these new cycling levels, and all cities had improved the safety of cycling. Bikeway infrastructure is, of course, not only important in Europe and the US. This shows you a graphic of cycling levels as percentage of trips on the vertical axis and the kilometers of bikeway infrastructure on the horizontal axis in Latin American cities, 29 of them. And you see that there's a correlation that the more bikeways there are, the more cycling we have in these cities. What do bikeways look like? Bikeways can be completely separated from cars in parks or along roadways. This is an example from Germany. What you see here on the upper left is a facility that's for bicycles in the middle, and then on the sides there are walkways for pedestrians. So it's also separated from pedestrians. Lots of examples of those, of course, here in the United States. Most regions have greenways. This is in Minneapolis. For example, what Minneapolis does, not entirely on their entire network, but they do a good job also in separating bicycles from pedestrians. So if you are on the right side of this solid line here, that's for pedestrians, and the other side is for bicyclists. Same is true here in Minneapolis on the Stone Arch Bridge. But you can already see that it doesn't always fully work, so the pedestrians are walking where the bikes are supposed to ride. So that just means that cyclists have to cycle carefully. This is a very nice facility in Santa Barbara. They took car travel lanes away and converted it into a bike path and a wider sidewalk on the right-hand side, giving cyclists a really comfortable and safe place to ride their bicycles. In European countries and cities, there's a new trend towards bicycle expressways. To some extent, it exists in the US a little bit as well. So the goal is to, in suburban areas or in rural areas around cities, to create networks of bikeways that allow you to cycle relatively fast to town centers or to the city center. The idea is that you do not have to cross any roadways when you're on these bike expressways. So whenever there comes a highway or a larger roadway, you either have a bridge where you go over, or you have an underpass where you go under, and you can ride on these facilities sort of in a very smooth and fast way. This has been implemented mainly outside of cities so far, because in the city it's much harder to find the space and to redesign the infrastructure there. More typical than the things we saw so far are bike lanes. Bike lanes are good because they give cyclists a dedicated space, and they indicate for drivers where not to be. The typical color chosen in the US is this sort of green color. Different countries have different ideas. In Denmark, it's blue. In Germany, they use red. In the US, it's the green color they're choosing. However, the bike lane is also problematic because if it's not respected, you don't have it. This shows you examples where cars are parked in bike lanes, but deliveries are happening in bike lanes. Or on the right, it's a picture from the UK where a bike lane is so close to the parked cars that a crash can occur. That's called dooring. Dooring means that a cyclist is hit by an opening door from a driver or a passenger who's not watching out when opening that door. In response, so-called buffered bike lanes have been built. These are still bike lanes with an added buffer to the side. This buffer separates the cyclists more from car traffic, and especially protects cyclists from an opening car door, because the car door would swing into this buffer and wouldn't swing to hit the bicyclists. But there are no physical barriers. It's still only paint on the ground, but the idea is to give more space. Maybe the most famous of these buffered bike lanes is on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., connecting sort of the White House to the U.S. Capitol. They have some physical separation, as you can see, with these bollards, but on the length of the facility, they don't have that. They just have the buffer. Yet another step up are so-called cycle tracks. And cycle tracks were first built at a larger scale in North America in Montreal. We have them also in European countries, but Montreal was the first in North America to have a network of them. What they are bicycling facilities with a physical separation from car traffic. Here, these are concrete barriers that don't allow cars to come over into the protected bikeway that's just for cyclists. New York City has sort of followed suit since 2007, has quite aggressively built these cycle tracks, and very successfully with big increases in cycling levels. This is a one-way street in Ninth Avenue in New York. The left-hand side of the street, they have built this cycle track. It's also signal controlled. You see the green light up here for bicycles going straight. At the same time, cars, you see the red light on the upper right here there, cars that turn left have a red light and they have to protect. So the red light is protecting the bicyclists while they have the green phase. And many cities have experimented with this and have all found big increases in cycling and safer cycling if they are designed well. This is an example of the separation of pedestrians, cyclists, drivers, and trolleys in Portland, Oregon, on a bridge over the Willamette River. Clearly dedicated bicycle space, pedestrian space, and then space for the other modes. In fact, bridges are often very, very important because rivers or highways can be a big, big barrier for cyclists and pedestrians to get across. So without these bridges, you cannot connect. And so they are very important sort of choke points where many cyclists pass by. So designing them well is important. These bikeway networks don't just grow overnight. The next couple of slides shows you an example from Portland, Oregon, and I had asked you on the second or third slide of the presentation to watch out for Portland, Oregon. So this shows you the off-street trails, the greenways in neighborhoods, and the separated in-row bike infrastructure they had in 1980. By 1990, they had expanded their network. By 2000, now you can probably use the term network. Before I called it a network, but it was sort of disconnected facilities. Now it looks more like a network of bikeway infrastructure. By 2010, even a denser network. And then by 2015, an even denser network. And you also noticed all the little dots and squares that popped up. They have also then shifted their emphasis of planning from building the facilities to also looking at intersections and putting in bicycle signals and bike boxes. And we talk in a little while about what bike boxes are. This is the same thing looking at the city of Seville in Spain. They have had the same bike growth that Portland had, but in a much shorter time frame. And what they did was they really aggressively built cycle tracks. And this is their network in 2005. This is the network by 2008. So this is, maybe I'll go back. This is only a 3-year difference. So they really aggressively built this bikeway infrastructure. This is by 2017, even denser. And they have seen a big growth from almost no cycling in the year 2000 to about 8% of trips made by bicycle by the year 2017. So a big change in how people ride. And you can sort of imagine why that is, because the bigger your network is, both in Portland and in Sevilla, what we saw here is the more destinations you can reach without cycling, with fast moving and big volumes of motorized traffic. And that's what we saw before. That's sort of what people are most afraid of when they are riding a bike. So these intersection treatments in Portland that we saw, there are several of those. This is an example of a bike box. Bike boxes are at intersections, and it's when bicyclists come up to an intersection, the bike box allows bicyclists to sort of wait or queue in front of cars. That increases the cyclist's visibility. So very often if a bike is in a bike lane or right next to a car at an intersection, that can be quite dangerous because the driver may not be aware of the bicycle on the right-hand side of the car. And when the driver makes a right-hand turn, they can get to a quite dangerous situation. If you have a bike box, you're putting the bicycles up front, you're increasing their visibility. At the same time, in certain places, bicycles also get a green sign. That means they get a green about 3 to 5 seconds earlier than the car drivers do. So the bicycles are already in the intersection when the cars get to start, and the safety is even more enhanced through that. You can also see different colors that are chosen here for the bike boxes. The left turning bike box that you see here, where you could be in front of the car and then make a left turn, have in studies shown to be not that popular because bikes, especially if they don't get an advanced green light, cyclists don't feel comfortable being in front of traffic and then having to turn left. This is a new intersection design called protected intersection. It's imported from the Netherlands, and I'll explain a little bit how this protected intersection works. This is how it was implemented in Salt Lake City in Utah. And so what you see at this protected intersection is you have your normal stop lines for cars, but then you have bikeways here in green, and you have concrete areas. And they are quite important because what they do is they change the turning radius of the car. They really force the turning radius of the curb. They really force the car to make a right angle turn, slowing down the driver. At the same time, while they slow down the driver, they increase the visibility of the bicyclist because bicyclists are carried forward into the intersection. So drivers are much more likely to see cyclists, and they are slower, and that reduces the likelihood of a crash. And if there is a crash, it reduces the severity of that crash. And so bicyclists who would come here from here as well, like the drivers, would get here, the drivers yield to them, cyclists pass, and then they can either queue here to go across here if they need to go that way, or they could continue on a cycle track in that direction. Other intersection treatments, and these are here from Denmark, include so-called green waves for cyclists. What a green wave is it's consecutive traffic lights that are timed for cyclist speed. In this case, at 22 kilometers per hour. So if you cycle at that speed at consecutive intersections, you will always have a green light as a cyclist. We're doing that a lot already in the US, mainly for drivers. Like where I live in Alexandria, Virginia, you can drive through Old Town Alexandria without stopping if you're just hitting the lights right on a car, not on a bike though. But so you can time these intersections for bicyclists, which speeds up the trip and makes it much more convenient for bikes. This is a very nice one here from Odense in Denmark, where I have these green bollards along the way that sort of indicate when you see green, oh, you are still good. If it turns orange, it means, oh, you have to speed up. But that's just because it was a showcase project. That's not typical. Other types of bike lanes include advisory bike lanes. That's again something imported from Europe, where you have roadways where there's not enough space to have a bike lane installed and a car travel lane, because by engineering standards, they all have minimum width. And so what you can do is you have these dotted lines giving the bicyclist a space, and the cars can use the middle of the roadway. However, when the cars have to pass each other, cars can go, after watching out, they can go into the bike lane, they can cross the dotted line and use that space to pass other cars who they encounter. We, of course, don't have to build bikeways everywhere, especially in neighborhood streets. We don't need bikeways typically. We can traffic calm neighborhood streets by reducing the speed limit, often in Europe to 30 kilometers per hour. That's about 19 miles per hour. And we can use physical measures to make it less attractive for cars to drive fast in these neighborhood streets. Why is this important? It's important because speed kills. This shows you the probability as a pedestrian to be fatally injured, so to be killed, when you collide with a vehicle. And once we hit about 30 kilometers per hour, that's 20 miles per hour, the likelihood of you getting killed when being hit by a vehicle increases at a very, very high rate. Now in the US, most of our urban speed limits are here at 25 miles per hour, or even 35 miles per hour. So we're in the wrong spot if we want to make crashes less severe. And if you think about it, if the speed is slower, the likelihood for a crash to occur is also lower, because you are more likely to be able to brake. And the pedestrian or the cyclist is also more likely to either brake or do something to avoid the crash. So the crash will be less severe, and we have a lower likelihood of a crash. These are some traffic calming measures as they are used in North America today already. This is in Quebec City and in Montreal. In Quebec City here, they have taken a neighborhood intersection. They've put these bollards up so cars cannot drive through this intersection. They have to turn left or turn right, depending from which direction they come, but bicycles can use that intersection in every which way. The same, what's done is here is a one-way street for cars, but bicycles can ride both ways, and so the entrance of this is blocked off for cars from this direction. Similar thing done here in Berkeley, California, where there is a cut through between two neighborhood cul-de-sacs, but it's not allowed for cars to connect between the two. Mainly on the West Coast, they have built neighborhood greenways or bike boulevards. Both terms are used. So these are traffic calm neighborhood streets that are designed to facilitate cycling. What that means is on a bike boulevard, typically in the US, you have in neighborhoods 4-way stop signs where everybody has to stop in the neighborhood and then continues. Along these bike boulevards, the stop signs are taken out in the direction of the cyclists. So if you cross the bike boulevard, you still have a stop sign, but if you go along the bike boulevard, you don't. And that speeds up cycling and makes it easier. Of course, it would also make driving easier, speed up driving. So what you have to do on the bike boulevards is you have to put in traffic calming devices to reduce driving and make driving less attractive. Another measure are so-called shared streets, where all modes of transport and pedestrians included are all allowed to use the main space, and everybody has to watch out for each other. Of course, the traffic speed will be very slow there because you have to negotiate the right-of-way. This shows you sort of most of the things we talked about so far put in one. It's the city of Berlin in Germany, about 3.5 to 4 million inhabitants. And they've built 1,100 kilometers of bike facilities and have traffic calmed almost all of their residential neighborhoods. And here we can see some of the facilities. They have cycle tracks close to the sidewalk. You can also ride in the street. They have traffic calming on neighborhood streets. This sign here is not the official traffic calming sign. The traffic calming is the 30 sign here, but it was one of the signs they invented in the early 80s when they experimented with traffic calming, and it tells you what the speed is. It's walking speed is what you're supposed to drive. And then they have these home zones where drivers have to yield to pedestrians and also to playing children. And your driving speed is supposed to be about 7 kilometers per hour. That's probably 4 miles per hour. So really, really slow. And you have to yield to those who are there. Of course, you can have shared bus and bike lanes, and you can have something like a bicycle street, which is a street where the bicycles have the main right of way, but cars can enter that street and use it as well. And overall, Berlin has been quite successful in increasing its share of trips made by bike to 13%. It's not just about moving bicycles, it's also about parking bicycles. So we did a study, literature review on bike parking, and what we found was that the supplies, or how much bike parking there is, and how convenient it is, are a determinant of cycling for those who currently cycle and who would cycle. If there's a lack of bike parking, it discourages riding bikes. Bike parking is preferred for personal security and safety from theft. And cyclists prefer higher quality bike parking facilities, such as covered bike parking, over lower quality bike parking. They also want bike parking to be close to where they come from and where they go. So if you build bike parking too far away from where people go, let's say a train station or a shopping center or whatever it is, people will not use it. And then if you start charging for bike parking, it's still used, but it reduces the usage. Good bike parking can also benefit merchants. These are examples where car parking spaces have been taken out and replaced by bike parking. And in cities where there's a lot of cycling, you can have many more customers that come by bike than just one car in a car parking spot in front of your business. We also looked at bike parking at work. This is a study we did in Washington, DC. And what we found was that those who have bike parking and showers and lockers for towels and other things at work are 5 times more likely to cycle to work than those who don't have these things. If you only have bike parking, but no shower and locker at work, you're still twice as likely to cycle to work in Washington, D.C. And importantly, if you have free car parking, you're about 70% less likely to cycle to work, because free parking is a big incentive to drive. Bicycling can be integrated with public transport. This can mean bike parking at transit stops or stations. It can also mean taking bikes on board buses or on bike racks in front of the buses or on trains, etc. This helps to make longer trips by bicycle. It also helps cyclists if they have mechanical failure or it rains and they want to ride in a transit vehicle. The US has a very high share of buses with bike racks, much higher than any European country, but 80% of buses have these bike racks in front. Several public transport systems have bike cars. This is Caltrain in San Francisco, where they have cars on their commuter trains that allow people to bring bikes into San Francisco and then cycle away from the station. The probably most well-designed bike parking garage is in Washington, D.C., next to Union Station. It's a very beautiful, beautiful amenity for about 130 bikes, which, by the way, compares to over 10,000 bikes parked at train stations in the Netherlands. So there's still, again, ways to go. Bike sharing can also be a good way to increase bicycling. Here we compared the bike share users to regular cyclists in Washington, D.C., and we found that bike sharers were more likely women than regular cyclists. They were younger. They were less likely to own a car. They were less likely to own a bicycle themselves, and they were more likely to ride for utilitarian purposes, like going to work, going to school, going shopping, etc. Training is also important. In most German, Dutch, and Danish cities, children take bike lessons in school in 3rd or 4th grade, first in the classroom, and then they practice on parcours like these. It's a very fancy one. Many of them are on parking lots or close to schools where there are little traffic signs and kids learn how to ride. The police are there to watch that the kids are doing it right. And then if there's time and money, the police also take the children then out and ride with them on bike facilities in the real world. We have these training programs also in the US, but most times they are voluntary. DC is the only so-called state. No, it's not a state, but DC is the only jurisdiction here in the US that's similar to a state that requires bicycling learning in school. We also have safe route to school programs. This is money that is used to make traveling to school on foot or by bike easier, more convenient, and safer to get kids off to a active travel start into their life. Of course, we also have to have cycling training courses for adults, in particular, given that many adults may not have ridden anymore for many, many years, and they want to get back on bikes and they have to learn again or want to learn again how to ride bikes. We also have to train motorists on the rights of cyclists and how to respect them. These are images from a driving exam in Germany, I think, where it's a written test where they sort of the question is, who has the right of way here? And I think the ones I chose it's always the cyclist or the pedestrian that has the right of way, but it can also be different, of course. The questions are not that easy, but it's part of the training to do so. The lower right hand is an important picture here. It's children sort of saying goodbye, and one of them is likely going to jot out in the street. And by law in Germany and the Netherlands, you as a driver have to watch out for children and others on bikes or on foot who may do things that are not fully rational. So you are driving there, and you have sort of a responsibility by going by there by car. This also then happens on the road test. And when you're tested for your driving, you have to show that you observe traffic. You have to make look over your right-hand shoulder. When you make a right-hand turn, you have to look over the left-hand shoulder before you open the car door. When you drive in a neighborhood, you have to show that you are ready to brake if a kid would be running out in front of a parked car, for example. There are events to increase bicycling. This is advertisement for the Bike to Work Day in San Francisco. It exists countrywide. It's in May, typically, where local bike clubs encourage people to ride their bike to work, and maybe they like it and they keep doing it throughout the entire summer. Many cities have bike report cards and bike councils. These report cards are sort of copied of Copenhagen, where they track the length of bikeway infrastructure, cycling safety. They do a survey about the satisfaction with bikeway infrastructure, and they do that over time. And the city even uses those metrics as their policy goals. Like they say, we want cyclists to be satisfied with the bikeway infrastructure at a 4.2 out of 5, for example. And then they try to work towards that goal. And then many cities have bicycle councils that provide feedback to city council and others about bicycling. Now, coming to a conclusion, what are policies, strategies to implement these bike-friendly measures? First, publicize both individual and societal benefits. So this includes the benefits like greenhouse gas emissions or air quality or energy use. That's a societal benefit, but also individual benefits like bicycling is good for you. Active travel is healthy for you. Ensure citizen participation at all stages of planning and implementation, especially include vulnerable, risk-averse, and disadvantaged groups in the planning process when you're planning bikeway networks and bikeway infrastructure. Develop long-range plans and also regularly update them. Implement controversial policies in stages. So you will not build one big bikeway network tomorrow, but you may build a couple of bikeway links, and then if people like it and if it's popular, you will be able to increase the network. Combine these incentives for cycling with disincentives for car use. So once you have a network of bikeways that makes cycling attractive and easy, maybe you have a good public transport system as well, you can also start making driving less attractive by reducing car parking or increasing parking fees, restricting car access, etc. Build alliances with politicians, bike organizations, and other bike-friendly groups. Often these are environmental groups, and they can lobby for the same thing. Bike advocacy is also coordinated nationally very well in many countries. So you have local bike clubs, often state bike clubs, and then national bike clubs. You can learn from successes and failures elsewhere. You see what worked, what doesn't work, what could work in your place. And many successful cities have conducted before and after studies. So they measure, let's say, safety, or they measure the number of cyclists going by a certain spot before they put in the bike infrastructure, and they measure after to show if and how it worked. In conclusion, bicycling is a sustainable means of getting around our cities. It has environmental, social, economic, and health benefits. Lots of daily trips in the US and North America are short enough to cover by bicycle. And there are many ways already known to increase cycling while making it safer. In fact, many North American cities are already implementing a wide range of measures to promote cycling that have resulted in big increases in cycling levels already. And now, before I leave you, I want to alert you to, if you want to see more details, our new book that just came out last week called Cycling for Sustainable Cities. It's 440 pages on bicycling. It's a true global effort. We have authors from 5 continents in different disciplines, planning, engineering, etc. So if you want to know more about bicycling, that's a good book. So I thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If we had been able to do this in person, we would have had a book signing, but I'm glad to know about the book that's out there. Congratulations. And let's see. So for those participants who would like to share questions, please feel free to do so. And maybe we can have our student moderators join on here. Perhaps they have something they'd like to start us off with. I always have a long list of questions, but I'm going to hold back. So let's see, Najee and Max, if you'd like to rejoin us. And then if either of you has a question they'd like to share, go for it, or you can let me know here if you'd like me to offer up a question. And you know what? There we go. Okay. Great. Here, let's do this way to make things easier. Maybe Max, it looks like we have a question that came in. Do you want to get us started and then we'll see what else comes in?
Sure, yeah. Somebody asked, how are e-bikes changing the cycling landscape?
So e-bikes are changing the cycling landscape in a big way. They have much more already in Europe. It started mainly in Europe with older adults buying these e-bikes. So people who would not cycle or would not dare cycling anymore are making more trips or longer trips by bicycle. Now it has sort of trickled down into larger parts of society. In the US, it's still a little bit of a fringe thing, but especially during the COVID crisis now, many people have bought these e-bikes, and we see people going longer distances or going routes they wouldn't have taken without the e-bike. So the e-bike can be a game changer. It can also go in the other way. In many Chinese cities, for example, we have a very high share of e-bikes, but what's qualified as an e-bike there, we would not consider as a bicycle anymore because they don't have pedals. Essentially, they have an electric crank, and they are some sort of an electric scooter. So the bikes I talked about here were so-called pedelecs, and pedelecs are bikes where when you pedal, you get an electric assist. And if you stop pedaling, you don't get an assist. And most studies around e-bikes have actually shown that there's a net gain in physical activity, especially for those who would not ride or would have stopped riding or wouldn't go that far. So e-bikes are a game changer. There's some concerns with e-bikes around speed, because they can be faster. There are different classes of e-bikes. The most normal class of e-bikes goes up to 20 miles per hour. Some of them go even faster. So on trails, for example, there may be a need to emphasize to people what the maximum trail speed is, to not go faster than that, and to be mindful of other trail users.
I apologize for the technical challenges here. I think that we have someone in the audience here who may like to ask a question. So I'm going to allow Meg to speak if they'd like to. I think we can hear you now if you'd like to.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay, good. Apologies.
I sent you a quick chat actually, but I don't think it went through. I guess, yeah, so I'm a student reporter for the school newspaper here, and my question for you is, why did you want to bring up the topic of cycling to college students, and how do you think cycling is related to climate?
So cycling is clearly related to climate if we can shift trips from cars in particular to bicycles, and especially for the commute to work. Our car occupancy rate for the commute to work is very low. Often we drive alone. I think it's something like 1.1 or 1.2 people per car during the commute hour. They take a lot of space. That's another issue. That's not related to climate change. But cars also burn a lot of energy, and so that commute to work driving alone is not very energy efficient, and there are a lot of CO2 emissions related to it. So if we are able to shift people from cars to bicycles, we can have a positive impact on the environment. Second element is, if we have people who ride public transport already and they are walking, if they can add the bicycle to their mode choice, maybe we can allow them to live without a car or be car free. So they can make certain trips for public transport, maybe going to work. They can walk locally, and if they have to go a little bit farther, they can ride a bike. So the bicycle can also be part of that transportation mode mix that can allow a car-free or a car-light lifestyle. I think bringing it up for students on a university campus is important, because the habits that students develop, or especially being exposed to public transport, has been shown to sort of stick with people in their later life. So if you as students are thinking about bicycling and maybe pick up bicycling, or get university administration to put in bike parking and bike friendly infrastructure and create an environment where people can ride their bike and enjoy it, they may take it with them in their later life. will consider riding a bike as well. So I think it's important for students to consider it, and especially combined with the answer to your first question about climate change.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
So we have another question. It says, does air pollution reduce cycling health benefits?
So there have been a couple of studies about the location of bikeways and air pollution from driving, and there can be negative effects. Like the one study I remember was, I think, from Seoul, Korea, and they had a poor cyclist cycle through a tunnel. A car tunnel, not a bike tunnel, a car tunnel, and the air pollution in that tunnel was really, really bad. So air pollution can reduce the benefits from cycling, and the routing of the bikeway infrastructure is important, and keeping it away from heavily polluted corridors is a good thing, or reducing the car travel in these heavily polluted corridors is important. That's actually also true for pedestrians. In some cities, they have in downtowns these transit malls where they have bikes sort of in one corridor. For example, Ottawa, Canada used to be one before they tunneled with the light rail. Minneapolis, Minnesota is another example. And in these downtown bus malls, as good as public transport is, because it's space efficient and all that, they used to be often powered, or still are, by diesel. The air quality there is not good. And what they do often is they separate the cyclists or the pedestrian routes from these transit corridors. So the bike route would be a corridor over and would not be in the same corridor with the diesel buses.
Max, you want to take this next question that came in?
All right, wait, can you hear me? Because,
Yes, we can. We're good.
all right, my computer is freaking out right now. Okay, so this question is, if you could drop a single book into the mailbox of every city planner in North America, what book would it be?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mean, a classic in our field is Jane Jacobs's The Death and Life of Great American Cities. So maybe, but it's a little bit esoteric. So I'm not sure if every city planner would actually enjoy the read. It's very insightful, and it's sort of a classic. Another one would probably be, that's also a classic, the Power Broker. It's a book about Robert Moses in New York City, who sort of transformed New York City to become very car friendly and car oriented, and how that goes together with how money flows and who holds the power and how decisions are made. I think these are very classic urban planning books. Then for a newer book, and maybe that's more relevant to the planner, it would be one of Jan Gehl's books. Jan Gehl is a designer, architect from Copenhagen, and he has many good ideas on how we can redesign cities and redesign spaces to be more pedestrian friendly, transit friendly, and and bike friendly, and design cities around people. These three, maybe the last one would be the most applicable for the city planner. The first two would be great reads as a background, but they may put them away after the first couple of pages.
Thank you for those recommendations. I see here we have another hand raised. I'm going to try to allow you to speak here. So I think Beverly Sherman, you should be able to speak now if you want to try that.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, very good. I just wanted to make a comment. I was in Amsterdam about 5 years ago. It was the beginning of a riverboat cruise for me. And we spent a couple nights in a hotel, and we had trips around the area, bus trips, to view different parts of the area. But what really surprised me is that I like to walk around and see in the city too. But it was frightening to do that because the bicyclists were so fast on their bicycles, your life was in danger. I just wanted to make a comment. I was shocked.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience. You really have to know where as a pedestrian, where you can stand and where you cannot. And I had exactly the same thing. I was looking at some building and then you go back a couple of steps because you really want to take in the entire building. And then somebody, even a whole group, cycled up with their bells ringing and to sort of jump away. And 2 points here. 1 point is A, you have to know what you do, and then B, bicyclists have also to be trained to be courteous, especially to pedestrians who are more vulnerable than the bicyclists are when the bikes are really fast.
Thank you for that. And with that, we have come to 6:30 when I generally sign off here. So with this, I would just like to, again, Ralph, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your research. And I think there will be plenty more conversation to be had on campus, or we're looking forward to reopening our bike share when the weather gets warm. And to continue to think about ways of helping people move to living car-free, and with bikes being one excellent option. So thank you so much for that. Thanks for our student moderators, and thanks very much to everyone who attended today and for your good questions. I hope you'll join us, as I said, next week on Wednesday, February 17th for our next presentation. So with that, I'll say good night to everyone. Take care, be well, and hope to see you next week. Thanks so much.
Good night. Thank you for having me and thank you for coming. Have a good night.